Hello everyone and welcome to our video project in which we will discuss oil prices. What about them? First of all, we will look at what is oil. Oil is formed from the accumulation of hydrocarbons at thousands of feet below the surface of the earth from the decomposition of organic materials like plants and marine animals which have died. We will now talk about the uses of oil. Oil, as we know, is one of the biggest input products that we use today. There are many uses of oil. First of all, we find bags, plastic bags. So for instance, everything that is made out of plastic comes from oil. Gas is a refined product that comes from oil. And lastly, we can look at the roads, which actually come from oil due to the asphalt on the roads. We will now look at the main producers of oil. First of all, we find the OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. It is an intergovernmental organization composed of 14 nations, among which we include Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. It was founded in 1960 in Baghdad. It has a major influence on global oil prices, as for instance, in 2015, these 14 countries accounted for an estimated 43% of global oil production. After those, we find the US with 13% of the world production, followed by Russia with a 12.4%, and then Canada with a 4.9%. We will now look at the different methods of oil extraction. We can divide this into conventional oil extraction methods and fracking. The first is basically a normal well in which oil is pumped out of an oil reserve that is easily accessible. Then we have fracking, which is a technique in which rock is fractured by a pressurized liquid, mostly water with some solids such as sand or aluminium, in order to allow oil to flow more freely to a point at which we can get it easier. This method has many advantages as it allows us to multiply the number of accessible oil reserves in the world, but it has a negative outcome. For instance, it uses chemical products to break the rocks, which can create contamination, and also by breaking the rocks, they create artificial semi-earthquakes that can change the environment. This is why this method is highly controversial in some countries. Regarding the evolution of prices, we see that prices fluctuate widely over the years. We could highlight the negative supply shock that took place in 1973, in which the OPEC coordinated a reduction in the supply of oil, which caused a drastic increase in oil prices. We can also see that during the 2008 recessions, prices went down abruptly due to a decrease in aggregate demand. After the crisis, prices increased from $47 the barrel to an average of $100 that lasted from 2011 to 2014, as demand was growing faster due to the recovery period. And then, in mid-2014, we see a positive supply shock as the OPEC increased supply in order to bring prices down. So the more technological and expensive American oil fracking companies would go broke. How can prices of the same product change from around $20 in 1972 to $120 in 1979? How is oil so volatile? Is there actually any logic at all behind these changes in prices? In order to do so, we will look at the ASAD model, which looks at the aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So, how does this supply shock affect this model? This is the 2008 financial crisis. Here, we see that there is a decrease in aggregate demand, so the curve moves down. So, in the short run, prices are sticky, so the level of prices should not adjust so quickly. Then, as we go to the long run, prices will go down as we move along the AD curve to match the long run average supply curve. Has this happened? Actually not. We are now looking at the 2014-2016 supply shock, positive supply shock, due to the war on prices. Here we see that the short run average supply increased, so the curve goes down, positive shock. Decreasing prices and aggregate demand remains the same. Therefore, prices will go down and output increases thanks to the war on prices. So was this actually what happened or not? Not really. So why didn't this model work? Because first of all, the price level is not that sticky in the short run. They may be for an economy in general, but not for a certain sector, and much less for an oligopolistic industry dominated by a cartel, such as the OPEC, who controls a large part of the world supply. Then we have problems defining what is short run and what is long run, and how much time passes between we move from one equilibrium to the next. Another point where this model did not work is because it is calculated in aggregate terms, which includes all goods and services. In the case of an economy that is highly dependent on oil, changes in oil prices will most likely affect the overall level of prices quite quickly. In order to understand better the behavior of oil price, we need to look for a simpler model that does not take into account aggregate demand and supply, but simply the demand and supply of one sole product. Looking at the 2008 recession, we see that a decrease in aggregate demand will certainly mean a decrease in demand for oil, which will bring down output and prices. Then we see the 2014 positive supply shock. That meant an increase in supply, which will increase output and decrease prices. This is actually what happened, and we can see from this graph that the main drivers behind the prices of oil are demand and supply. So for instance, when supply is lower than demand, the prices decrease, and when demand is higher than supply, prices increase. We will now quickly compare the two outcomes of two different supply shocks. First of all, we have the negative oil supply shock of 1973, and then the positive oil supply shock of 2014. The change in prices was more or less similar, a bit more accentuated in 1973. Of course, this is changed into today's currency. But how many of you have heard about the deep crisis after the oil shock of 1973? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it. Oh yes, I did. Me. But let me ask you another question. Have you heard of the glorious expansion that took place with the 2014 positive oil shock? That's right. The main reason behind this fact is that the global economy is now much less oil dependent than it was in the 70s, thanks to the growth of post-industrial countries and new energy alternatives. But does this mean that there was no consequence at all after the 2014 supply shock? This is weird. Of course there were consequences, and we will try to explain them through the Phillips curve, which establishes a relationship between inflation and unemployment. We see that as unemployment decreases, inflation must increase. But was this really the case for the US? No, it was not. In 2015, we saw the US a reduction of unemployment and inflation was even negative. Is this possible? Yes, it is called expansionary disinflation, which means economic expansion while having deflation. It was exactly the opposite at what has happened during the negative oil shock in 1973, when the economy was in a recession but price level kept rising. This means that oil prices still plays a key role in determining macroeconomic variables and their effect on our daily life. So, yes, oil prices affect real prices of all products and can create expansion periods or recession periods, but in a lesser degree now. Thank you very much for watching the video, and please give it a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it.